everyone. Welcome to the 2019 National Lead Poisoning Prevention Week webinar series. National Lead Poisoning Prevention Week is a call to bring together families and individuals, community and faith-based organizations, industry, and grantees, including state, tribal, county, and local governments, and many others. The goal is to increase lead poisoning prevention awareness in an effort to reduce childhood exposure to lead. HUD's Office of Lead Hazard Control in Healthy Homes, EPA's Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention, and CDC's Lead Poisoning Prevention and Environmental Health Tracking Branch collaborate annually on this observance. The webinars are also supported by the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture and the National Healthy Homes Partnership. For more information about National Lead Poisoning Prevention Week, you can visit the HUD website at www.hud.gov/program_offices/healthy_homes/NLPPW to get more information and to download the new Partner Information Toolkit. Today's webinar is Renovation, Repair, and Painting Rule, RRP, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Our presenter is Mike Wilson of the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. We're pleased that you have joined us for this event. This webinar will last approximately 30 to 45 minutes with 15 minutes at the end for questions. At the end of the webinar, you will be given information on links to additional resources for your program. We are recording this webinar and we will be posting it for viewing later if you prefer. Finally, we ask that you keep your microphone muted during the presentation. If you have questions before then, please feel free to post them in the questions window, which you will see as part of your GoToWebinar portal, usually to the right side of your screen. So please use that for questions, and I will be reading the questions to Mike. So Mike, we look forward to your presentation.
All right, great, Michael. I appreciate that. Again, my name is Mike Wilson. I'm from EPA. And we're here today to talk about the renovation, repair, and painting regulation. The regulation was finalized in 2008 and fully implemented in 2010. Next year will actually be the 10-year anniversary of the full implementation of the program. So with the webinar today, I'm going to briefly go through some background information about lead. Then we'll discuss some of the rule requirements, and then go through some helpful resources so you can find answers to the questions you may have easily using our website and other resources. So with that, we might as well get started. If I can get my slide to move forward. There you go. All right, lead was banned from residential use in 1978. What's interesting is we often still hear folks say that they didn't know that lead-based paint was still a problem. This chart and this information on this slide hopefully will express to you that it indeed is still a problem. It was banned in '78, but there were still millions of homes that were constructed prior to 1978 that contained lead-based paint. And as of today, there's about 30 million homes that still contain lead-based paint. The older a home is, the more likely it is to contain lead-based paint. As you can see in the chart, if a home was built before 1940, about 87% of those homes contain some lead-based paint. Now, the newer homes, if they were built between 1960 and 77, that number is only 24%. That's because in the 1950s or so, lead-based or latex paint technology was improving, and throughout the 50s, latex paints gained market share and became kind of took over for lead-based paint, and then the ban took effect soon after. How does lead get into the body? People, especially young children, can swallow lead dust as they eat, play, or perform other hand-to-mouth activities. And those hand-to-mouth activities are why children are especially susceptible to ingestion of lead-based paint. People, meaning adults, can also have issues with lead. That's often for an adult due to work or work-related issues or hobbies. An adult working with lead or lead-based paint in a business such as renovation and repair and painting, mining, smelting, battery recycling, finishing of old furniture, auto body work, shooting ranges, that type of thing, they all involve the use of lead. And a worker can be contaminated as clothing from that and bring that home. Hobbies also often use lead. Hobbies like hunting, fishing, working with stained glass, and making pottery. It can be found in shot, fishing sinkers, jigs. So the solder that's used for stained glass, it can be used in dyes and glazes that are in pottery and many other places. So those are typically the ways, you know, both through work and hobbies that an adult would be exposed to lead-based paint. Lead effects on the human body. In children, lead causes adverse health effects, including attention-related behavioral problems, greater incidence of problem behaviors, decreased cognitive performance, reduced postnatal growth, things like that. While low-level exposure is common, there are some cases of high-level exposure, and that can even be more serious, where we see children with extremely high levels of lead actually suffer from seizures, unconsciousness, and in some cases, death. Although children are especially susceptible to lead exposure, lead can be dangerous to adults too. In adults, exposure can lead to things like harm to a developing fetus, increased chance of high blood pressure, fertility problems in both men and women, high blood pressure, digestive problems, and nerve disorders. The Renovation, Repair, and Painting Regulation was created to address lead-based paint hazards created by renovation, repair, and painting activities that disturb lead-based paint in target housing and child-occupied facilities. We'll just quickly cover what target housing and child-occupied facilities mean. Target housing is any housing constructed prior to 1978, the year that the use of lead-based paint would have been banned, except housing for the elderly or persons with disabilities, unless there's going to be a child under the age of 6 that resides in that facility, or any zero-bedroom dwelling. Child-occupied facilities mean a building or a portion of a building constructed prior to 1978 that's visited regularly by the same child that's under the age of 6. Child-occupied facilities can include things like daycare centers, preschools, kindergarten classrooms, and they can also be located within target housing or in a public or commercial building. To whom does the RRP rule apply? In general, anyone that's paid to perform work that disturbs paint in housing and child-occupied facilities, which we discussed what those are, that are built before 1978, can be subject to the rule. That includes residential rental property owners and managers, general contractors, specialty trade contractors like painters, plumbers, carpenters, and electricians. One thing to highlight here is that in that definition, the very beginning, it says paid to perform. One of the things that's important to note here is that compensation for rent or for childcare services are considered to be compensation or payment for services. So what does that mean? That just means that, say you're a landlord who rents a building that you own, and you do work in that building yourself. So you're not being compensated directly for renovation work in the home, but the rent that you receive by the occupants of the building is considered payment for those services. So the renovation regulation would apply. The same is true for childcare facilities. So if an owner of a childcare facility is doing work on the place themselves, they're not being paid directly for that work, but they are receiving compensation for the childcare services. That would be covered by the regulation as well. So it's important to make note of that. What activities are covered? In general, any activity that disturbs paint in a pre-1978 home or child-occupied facility is covered. Renovation means the modification of any existing structure that results in the disturbance of painted surfaces, unless the activity is performed as part of an abatement. So renovation specifically excludes work that's abatement, but basically any other work that disturbs painted surfaces that's done for compensation in a pre-78 home or child-occupied facility is covered by the regulation. The term renovation includes things like the removal, modification, or repair of painted surfaces or components. It can include weatherization products or projects, and it can include interim controls that disturb painted surfaces. Also, it's important to note that renovation performed for the purpose of converting a building or a part of a building into target housing or a child-occupied facility is also renovation. So if you had a building that was used for a commercial purpose and then it was being converted over to rental or apartment units, then that conversion process would be covered by the regulation. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about what is excluded from the regulation. So housing built in 1978 or later is not subject to the regulation. As we discussed in our definition of target housing, housing for the elderly or disabled persons, unless there's a child under 6 that resides or is expected to reside there, they are not included. 0-bedroom dwellings are excluded, and housing or components that have been declared lead-free are excluded. That last item basically means was the paint tested, and here that's an important thing to talk a little bit more about. So the rule itself does not require testing before work is done. Basically, a renovation contractor that's doing work in a home built before 1978 has a choice, or the purchaser of the service has a choice. They can either go ahead and follow the requirements of the renovation regulation without testing, or they can test. If they test and they find that no lead-based paint is present on the components affected by the job, then the renovation requirements would not apply to that work. If they do find lead paint is present, then they are required to follow the requirements of the rule. So the rule, again, this is a question we often receive, is testing mandatory? We've heard testing is required. It's not required. It is an option. You can always choose just to follow the work practice standards or do testing. And then I guess I could mention real quick, testing can be done in a couple of ways. Testing can be done by a certified renovator using a test kit. Testing can also be done by a certified renovator or an inspector or risk assessor using a paint chip. That's not as often used because it's a little more destructive, and often a homeowner looking for services isn't looking for that type of that much damage to be done to evaluate whether lead is there. And the third option is an inspector or a risk assessor using an XRF device to identify lead-based paint on the components that are affected by the rule. Also excluded are small jobs, minor repair and maintenance activities. So these are jobs that affect 6 square feet or less of paint per room for an interior job, or 20 square feet or less on an exterior job. The note here is important. This minor repair and maintenance provision or exclusion only or does not apply for jobs that involve window replacement, jobs that involve demolition, or prohibited practices. And we'll mention this a little bit later. There's several practices that are prohibited by this regulation, and they're always prohibited by the regulation regardless of the size of the activity. So this, so even if you're doing something that only disturbs a square foot, one of the things that's prohibited is the use of a torch to burn the paint, and that is always always prohibited regardless of the size of that project. So that's important to note. All right, so what are the principal components of the renovation, repair, and painting program? It has several key elements. The first of which is the accreditation of training providers. The rule requires renovators to be trained, so it has provisions that ensure that training providers know what they're doing and they're providing quality training. Second element is the certification of renovators and firms. So renovators have to be trained. Firms have to apply for and receive certification to be able to do renovation, repair, and painting work. The rule also requires the notification of occupants and owners of housing and child occupied facilities about the work. This involves mainly the distribution of a brochure and some other information that we'll talk about a little bit. It involves one of the principal components of the rule is the work practice standards, which are there to keep non-workers away, to isolate the area so that dust and debris doesn't get out, and to thoroughly clean up. And the last element is the fact that the program is delegable, which means that EPA can approve states and tribes that seek authorization to run their own programs. So it is a delegable program. All right, so let's run through each of these in a little more detail. So in the renovation, repair, and painting program, there are two individual disciplines. There are a renovator and there are dust sampling technicians that can be trained and certified underneath the program. So a training provider can apply for accreditation to teach either or both renovator or dust sampling technician training, either the initial or the refresher courses. And they must submit an application to feed EPA to do that. That application is reviewed and evaluated, and upon receiving accreditation, they're accredited for a period of 4 years. The initial courses for each the renovator and dust sampling technician have to last a minimum of 8 hours. They each have to include 2 hours of hands-on activity, and each of the refresher courses has to last at least 4 hours and include an hour of hands-on activities. And then trainers doing both renovator and dust sampling technician training have to notify EPA. With this program, that's extremely important. They provide notice prior to the teaching of a course, which lets EPA know when that's happening. And then if we have compliance assistance folks that want to go take a peek at a course, they're able to do that. They also provide post-training notice. Why that's so important in the renovation world is that renovators and sampling technicians are considered certified upon completing the training course. And so because they're considered certified upon completing the training course, that means they don't interact directly with the agency, like submit an application. And so the information we get from the trainer then is basically the information that we have of who our certified renovator and sampling technicians are. So it's a key element of the accreditation portion of the regulation. Next is certification. So both, again, we've mentioned firms and individuals must be certified under the renovation regulations. Firms have to submit an application and fee to EPA to apply for certification. That's evaluated, and when approved, that certification is good for a period of 5 years. Renovators and dust sampling techs, they take that 8-hour course, they get a course completion certificate, and at that point they're certified. There's no interaction with EPA. There's no application that they have to provide. That course completion certificate is very important that they hang on to that. It includes information about what class was given. Their picture is included on there, so it's used as like an identification for compliance assistance folks. It has the date the course was taken and also the expiration date of the course, which we'll talk about here. So if it was an initial course that certification is good for a period of 5 years. Now, a few years ago, we made a change to the requirements for recertification of renovators to give folks more options. So the new options were a refresher renovator course that does not include a hands-on component. A renovator has an option to take that course to be recertified. The difference between a typical recertification and that, though, is that they get a 3-year certification rather than a 5-year certification. And then the next time that they want to be recertified, they have to take a recertification class that involves a hands-on component, so an in-person class. Right? So any renovator that's applying for recertification has two choices then. They basically can do a recertification class that's in person with a hands-on component, and they'll receive a 5-year certification, or they could do it online where there is no hands-on component. They'll get a 3-year certification. And again, if you do the online choice, then your next recertification, which would be 3 years later, you would have to do a recert that included hands-on, and that would give you a 5-year recertification period. So certifications for renovators are good for 3 to 5 years, depending on the type of recertification class taken. All right, pre-renovation education. So firms that perform renovations have to distribute EPA's Renovate Right pamphlet before starting renovation work to occupants and owners of homes and child-occupied facilities. When we get into a couple slides from now, we're going to kind of go through some information resources. I'll point out to you that brochure in case you're not familiar with it. Firms must also notify residents of work in common areas and parents when working in child-occupied facilities by either distributing renovation notices or posting informational signs. The firm must document the steps performed to notify all occupants of the intended renovation activities and to provide the pamphlet. So they have to document all this work and keep that in their records. All right, let's talk for a few minutes about the work practice standards and what's required there. So for a job, the job requires signs to be posted, and those signs are defining the work area. So it's basically telling occupants of the space where the work is being done and to tell them to stay out. The work area has to be contained. The regulation has a performance standard that basically says that no dust or debris can leave the work area. So the firm establishes a work area, introduces containment with the goal that no dust or debris will leave that area. That work area, at a minimum, has to include 6 square feet of plastic away from the area being disturbed in any direction. And that is a minimum. It may need to increase depending on the type or scope of the work being done. But at a minimum, there has to be at least 6. For a job involving outside work, that minimum is 10 feet. So you have to have at least 10 feet of plastic away from any of paint that's being disturbed for an exterior job. Another interesting element of exterior requirements is that so it requires 10 feet minimum of plastic sheeting on the ground to define the work area. If there were a property that was within that 10 feet area, the rule does require either vertical containment or another equivalent precaution, so something similar to a vertical containment system be installed to keep dust and debris from migrating to adjacent properties. All right, the rule does prohibit certain practices, and we mentioned this earlier. It prohibits the use of open flame burning or torching. It prohibits the use of machines that remove paint unless they're equipped with a HEPA exhaust control. And it prohibits the use of a heat gun above 1100 degrees. And again, here, just as we mentioned before, these items are prohibited regardless of the size of the job, and the minor repair and maintenance exemption does not apply to these activities. All right, so a job is contained. The renovator goes in, does the work that they're going to do, and then at the end, the most important part is the cleaning and verification steps to make sure that the space is safe for reoccupancy of the occupants of the unit. So cleaning, so the goal of cleaning is to ensure there's no dust or debris left in the area. That's done using a combination of wet wiping and wet mopping and HEPA vacuuming. Just in case you don't know, a HEPA vacuum is a vacuum cleaner that's designed with a high efficiency particulate air filter as a last stage of filtration. That filter is capable of capturing particles of 0.3 microns at 99.97% efficiency. The vacuum cleaner must be designed so that all air drawn into the machine is expelled through the filter and none of the air leaks past. This definition was actually carefully crafted to make sure that vacuums were basically they're sealed and that they were designed and intended to be used with a HEPA filter. It's trying to prevent folks from taking like a regular shop vac and just duct taping on a HEPA filter on the exhaust and trying to use that for renovation work. These are vacuums that are designed to be used with this HEPA filter, and they are sealed vacuums. All right, so once the cleaning is done and the containment, the plastic sheeting is removed, the rule allows for a couple different ways to kind of check to make sure that the space is clean enough. It includes, it allows a cleaning verification procedure and then also clearance testing. Cleaning verification is kind of like a white glove procedure where wet and dry cleaning cloths are rubbed over a certain area within the work area, and then they're compared to a card. If they're cleaner than the card, then the area is clean and cleared. If they're not, it has to be re-cleaned. And so there's a procedure for that within the regulation. The other option is clearance testing. Clearance testing is something that's done in our abatement program where the area within the work area is wiped with basically something like a baby wipe. They're then contained and sent to a laboratory for analysis. The lab gives a result. That result's then compared to a clearance standard. If the result is less than that numerical standard, then the area is clear and ready to be reoccupied. If it's not, it would have to be re-cleaned and retested with the testing, the wipes going to a laboratory again for analysis. All right, let's talk just a moment about enforcement. EPA has a couple of enforcement elements within this regulation. They can suspend, revoke, or modify a firm's certification or a trainer's accreditation if it's found to be non-compliant. In addition, there are civil and criminal penalties. Civil penalties that can be up to $38,892 per violation per day. Criminal penalties that involve imprisonment or both. Just to let you know. So these are maximums. If I believe our penalty policy is posted online, I believe. And if you were curious, you could go there and take a look at what typical penalty amounts would be for violations of the renovation regulation. All right, so we did say that this program is delegable. At this time, we have 14 states and 1 tribe that are authorized and run their own renovation, repair, and painting programs. We have several more programs that are actively pursuing authorization, and we're excited about the prospect of them taking over the programs. All right, resources. I think this is the most important part of this presentation, really any presentation. I want to run through with you a couple of our web pages that I think are really helpful. And if you've not seen them before, hopefully you'll think that they're a place that you'll go in the future to look for information. The first is our contractors page. So this is within the renovation. It's within the webpage about, and it's information about the renovation, repair, and painting program specific to contractors. This page is kind of nice for a contractor. It includes several tabs. The first tab is an overview tab that just includes information about what the rule is and what its requirements are. The next tab provides information about firm certification, how it's done, when you have to do it, who has to do it, talks about the authorization status of states in this section. So it's asking you where you plan to do work. If you do plan to do work in a state that's authorized, it will direct you to the authorized state program for information about certification. So that's super helpful. The next tab is for renovator training. This gives you information about renovator training, when it's required. That talks about the recertification requirements. This will talk about what we were talking about, that doing an in-person refresher versus non-in-person refresher, and information like that. It gives you links to find training courses and providers in your area. So it's very helpful. The next tab is a work practice tab, which goes through in some detail the work practice requirements for the regulation, which is very helpful. Yeah, so that's great. And then I think, to me, the best page on this contractor site is this resources page. So if you've not been here before, I hope you'll think that it's very helpful. It includes a fairly good list of brochures that are specific to the renovation program. It includes the Renovate Right brochure, which is the one that we mentioned earlier, is distributed prior to renovation work. So if you're not familiar with the cover, let me just open it real quick so you can see it. So that's what the brochure looks like. All right, and this so again, here we have the whole brochure. It's actually in a number of different formats. It's in different languages. It's in color. It's in black and white. So for distribution purposes for the rule, it does have there's a black and white version that can be copied on a printer, which can be very helpful. So again, and we have other items here. We have the steps brochure, which kind of goes through step by step how to do a lead safe renovation, repair, and paint. That's a very helpful guide. We have the paint chip collection guide, which basically gives step by step instructions on how to take a paint chip sample. I think one of the most important ones here, and let's open this real quick so I can show you one thing before we move on this page, is the small NA compliance guide. So if you're not familiar with this, I would suggest taking a look. It's a document that lays out or tries to summarize the requirements of the regulation in a fairly clear way. But the really nice thing about it is, if this is what it looks like on its cover. Let me shrink it a little bit. What's really nice about it is that it has flow charts, and I believe they start on page 7. And I know it's this is small and probably difficult to read, but I encourage you to go in and take a look if you've not looked at this before. So we're almost there. I think we have one more page, or 2 more pages. 3 more pages. All right, so here's where they begin. They're on page 7 of the brochure. It's actually a really nice feature of this brochure, and really helpful. You go in, you start in the top left. It starts asking you questions about the job you're doing, and the flowchart will then tell you, what requirements of the pre-renovation education program are required for you. Are there HUD requirements that may apply to your job? What are the work practice requirements that are required, if you get to that point through the questions. So it's super helpful. If you've not seen it before, it's probably worth taking a look. It it's helpful enough where, you know, you could probably just print the pages that have the flow chart and just keep those handy as a reference in the future. All right, and let me show you a couple more things on this page, and then I want to move to a different page and show you a few more things. All right, so let me get back to the resources tab. All right, so that includes a bunch of brochures that are very helpful and are great references. The next section includes sample forms. So the rule requires a renovator to keep a bunch of to do a bunch of documentation. So this provides you with one place that provides the samples that we have for the various forms that a renovator would need. The pre-renovation disclosure form, so this is a form that would document the pre-renovation notice that's required. The notice and record of tenant notifications, that documents here as well as the sample record keeping checklist. That's like a summary document. So after the renovation, it includes all the required elements that a firm needs to document in one document, so they can fill that out for each job and keep a copy of that in their records. Next, we have a section with the legislative and regulation information. So you can find that top link is a really nice link if you're interested in looking at the regulation itself. It's up to date and complete. The nice thing about it is in the past, when regulations were done, you'd have to wait for books basically to be published. So oftentimes, if something happened, say a rule changed one year, and you didn't get that revised book until the next, it would be difficult to know, you know, what had happened. You'd have to be looking at the individual publications to understand what had changed in that period of time. But this online tool is updated basically instantly when rules are changed, so it's always current, which is fantastic. Other resources. These are just some other nice things. We have a newsroom. It's a good place to go to see if about new things that have happened. We've had a bunch of newsletters that we've distributed over time, and there's a page that includes all of those. So it's a great resource to go back and take a peek at those. And there's a few other things here as well. So let's move to my last slide. All right, so that was all information about the renovation program, really specific to a contracting company that's doing work in the renovation program. This next slide, I want to show you just a few things where if you have a question about renovation, if you have a question about abatement or lead in general, these are the places I think that are the most helpful to be able to try and find answers to your questions. The first of which is our main lead page, which is www.epa.gov/lead, and it will bring you here. This was just recently revised, so if you've seen it before, if you've been here before, I encourage you to come back. It's been reorganized a little bit. I think it's super easy right now to find information that people are most interested in. So this presentation focuses a lot on the renovation program. You can see right on the main page, there's a bunch of links to the RRP program. That one right there, the information for contractors, will take you right to the page that we just talked about a few minutes ago. So if you want to get there, the easiest way is just to do that. I have the rent contractors page bookmarked on my screen so I can get to it right away, but this works great too. So definitely take a look at that page, and then of course our web page is full of information. Hopefully it's easy for you to find and get the answers you're looking for. Now what I want to point out next is we have a frequent questions feature on the website, and let me go to that real quick and I'll show you where to find it as well. So the frequent questions items, we have frequent questions, so questions and answers that have been done over a period of time, basically for all of our programs. This has in the lead program stuff for disclosure, for abatement, for renovation, for pre-renovation education. So you can go in here. There's a search box up here in the upper left. You can plug in a word or a phrase that you're interested in, whether or not there's been a question and answer done about that, and they'll pop up. So I know one of the things that we often get questions about is in the contracting world is subcontractors. So you can just type in subcontractors, and you'll see it'll show there's 10 results that include the word subcontractor. You can take a peek at what the question is. It'll show you a piece of the answer. But if you click on the question, you'll go to the full question and answer and see what it is. And they can be very helpful in trying to figure out what the answer is to some questions that you may have in pretty much any area of lead regulation that EPA handles. So that's really helpful. And you can get there right there with the frequent questions about lead under the Have a Question heading on the main page. All right, so it's super easy to find. And then the other ways that we'd like, or I think that would be helpful for you to get answers, would be both regional contacts. So this link basically provides information about, or EPA is divided into 10 regions. It provides the contact information of the person that's kind of in charge of lead activities in each of the regions. So they're all listed here. So you can always go and either call or email one of our, they're called regional lead coordinators. And then always remember that we have hotlines. We have a lead hotline and also the safe drinking water hotline. They are great. You can, like the lead hotline here, let's just open that real quick. On their webpage, they'll give you their hours. They'll tell you about how you can ask questions. They have a document request form. You can click this and pick documents that you want mailed to you. You can call them with questions. You can also email them questions or send them electronically using this form. Just fill out your question, your contact information, hit submit. It's fantastic. So definitely a great resource. And I believe, yep, that was the last slide I had. Again, my name's Mike Wilson, work for EPA. This talk's been about the renovation, repair, and painting program. And I think at this point we have some time for questions.
We do, Mike. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. It was very informative. And, I've been to a couple of the presentations over the years, and as you update information, it's always great to see the information that you've updated. I will go ahead and ask you some questions. I want to remind everybody before I do that there is a questions tab on your GoToWebinar. It's usually on the right side of your screen, but if you click on the questions and you type in a question, I will then read them to Mike so that he can answer them. We've only gotten one question at this moment. I will have a follow-up question, but someone's asking if we're going to share the PowerPoint presentation, and the answer is we do record these webinars. If you've registered and obviously you're attending the webinar, you're going to get a follow-up email that has a link to the recording, and then we usually, as long as Mike says it's okay, we'll go ahead and attach the PowerPoint presentation to that. Do you have any restrictions on that, Mike, or do you have any?
You can,
okay, so we'll make sure that that gets posted. So I have a question that I ran into the last couple of months, and this is appropriate time to ask you. So on the exemption rule of the 20 square feet outside, I've run into a situation where I had a client ask me, is there a time frame between the application of the 20 square feet? And the question that came up was, what stops a contractor other than just, following or not following the rule to do 20 square feet and then come back like 6 months later and do another 20 square feet? I'm saying, in other words, is there anything about that, about the time gap between when that rule would no longer apply because they're just trying to game the system by just doing it in bits and pieces?
Yeah, well, the regulation basically says the work done over a 30-day period would have to be summed together to, when it comes to the minor repair and maintenance exemption. So yeah, if they were doing 2 or 3 projects within a month, all, and it's exterior, and they're each 10 square feet, then that would trigger the requirements of the rule if they're done in a 30-day period.
Okay, so 30 days is the cutoff point where
Uh-huh.
that's what it would be cumulative.
Yes.
Okay, so we have another question. Let me read this one here real quick. The question is, the verification cards produced by EPA were developed based on the old lead hazard standards. Now that the lead hazard standards have been drastically reduced, will EPA be reissuing the verification cards to denote when the RRP project site is clean?
Well, that's an interesting question. So the change that happened was to the hazard standards, not the clearance standards. There is a project underway now to review the clearance standards and to reevaluate those. And that project could affect the clearance cards and maybe cause or create a need for that to be reevaluated. I'm not sure at this point in time. But again, the change, I think the important thing is that the change that has taken effect is that the hazard standards have changed. So those are the standards that, say, a risk assessor would use to evaluate a property to determine if it was safe. Not the clearance standards that are used following abatement or renovation where a sampling is done.
Okay, thank you. While we're waiting for some more questions, and again, I want to remind people to go ahead and type in your questions. Is there, I guess it'd be hard to ask this question, but in those standards you're talking about for the cleanliness of after the renovation, do you think the restrictions are going to go up or down, or do you have any indication of how they're going to change?
The clearance levels? No,
Yes.
that work is just beginning.
Okay.
I believe it was just added to the agency's reg agenda. So we'll just have to see how that process plays out.
Okay. Fantastic. So let me see if we have any more questions. It appears we don't. We'll go ahead and wrap this up then. Mike, thank you so much for this presentation. It's a great topic to be in the inaugural webinar for this year for National Lead Poisoning Prevention Week. Want to thank everybody for attending. Keep in mind we have another webinar this afternoon. We have 2 tomorrow and 1 on Thursday. Thursday, sort of the bookend webinar to this one with Warren Friedman and I believe Bruce Haber talking about the lead hazard standards from the HUD perspective, and the new lead paint guide. So Mike, thank you very much for this. Actually, there is one more question real quick here. Let's see if we can squeeze this in. The person is asking, when did the fine cost change?
When did the what cost change? Oh, the fines?
The fine, yeah.
Yeah, they're updated annually. I'm not really sure what document they're changed in. That number was given to us by our enforcement folks. I'm not sure what the method is, to be honest. But that is the current number.
No problem. Well, having said that, again, I thank everybody for the presentation. Mike, thank you for a wonderful presentation, and hope to see many of you at the future webinars later on this week. Thank you very much, and this will be ending the webinar.